Good morning. This meeting of the House Select Committee on Restoring Law and Order will come to order. Tom, would you call the roll? Here.
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 Thank you. In June, a bipartisan majority of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives passed House Resolution 216, ordering the formation of a select committee. Today's hearing, along with the hearing tomorrow, is in furtherance of the select committee's responsibilities as charged by the House. As outlined in the resolution, the purpose of this committee is to investigate, review, and make findings as it relates to several interrelated topics. The committee will investigate and make recommendations regarding rising crime rates in the city of Philadelphia. The committee is to review the use of public funds intended for the purpose of enforcing criminal law and prosecuting crime in the city of Philadelphia. The committee is to review how victims of crime are being treated in this city, with a focus on the rights legally afforded to crime victims by law or court rule. And the committee is to look into how public funds intended for the purpose of benefiting crime victims are being utilized, particularly as it relates to crime victim compensation and services within the city. The committee is charged with reviewing and making determinations about the performance of certain public officials within the city of Philadelphia. The committee is also charged with making recommendations as to potential legislation or other legislative action related to law enforcement, including policing, prosecution, and sentencing, along with recommendations about the expenditure of public funds, delivery of services to victims of crime, and other legislative actions to ensure the enforcement of law and order in the city of Philadelphia. This investigation requires a broad and robust effort to review documents, take testimony, and other actions as necessary. As a part of the investigative work of this committee, as chairman, I've issued subpoenas for documents and information. These subpoenas have resulted in significant production of documents and information that is under review. My counsel has conducted a number of interviews. Additional information has been submitted to the committee for consideration as well. All of this data will contribute to the committee's final report, recommendations, and any other actions contemplated by this committee. Now, there's good reason for this investigative probe. Let's take a look at data published by Philadelphia officials themselves. According to the data compiled by Rebecca Reinhardt, Controller for the City of Philadelphia, as of September 22nd, 2022, there have been 1,379 non-fatal shootings and 366 fatal shootings in the city to date in 2022. The city reached a grim milestone earlier this week, 1,000 carjackings to date this year, including the carjacking of a member of the United States Congress in broad daylight in South Philadelphia, just blocks away from the sports complex. Burglaries and armed robberies have dramatically increased as well, contributing to a sense of lawlessness in the city expressed by residents, employers, students, and tourists. Shoplifting has reached an epidemic level. The increase in crime has led to a decline in the quality of life for everyone in the city, a regional impact to surrounding areas, and of course, a lifetime of pain for those who have lost a family member to senseless criminal activity. In addition to the real and gruesome human costs of increased violence, there is a financial cost as well. This year's city budget includes hundreds of millions of dollars to fund anti-violence initiatives. Notable retailers, large and small, including Starbucks, have closed locations in the city as a result of persistent crime. These closures gained outsized media attention and helped contribute to the narrative that the city is unsafe. Just look at the media coverage of the ransacking of a Wawa on the Roosevelt Boulevard earlier this week and the corresponding surge of discussion on social media. On a larger scale, an August 2nd, 2022 article in the Philadelphia Business Journal outlined the reluctance of major regional corporations to locate employees within the city limits. While the city has had many success stories in recent years attracting a diverse group of new employers, crime and lawlessness are holding the city back from achieving its full potential. Now, I'm sure many here today follow the news. Here are a few headlines just from the last week. Man shot in rear driveway of Northeast Philadelphia home. 5 high school football players shot, 1 dead in Philadelphia. 2-year-old shot in another night of gun violence in Philly. Girl, 8, caught in the crossfire as nearly 50 shots fired in North Philadelphia. Man dies after being shot 21 times in Philadelphia neighborhood. 2 teens shot in Philadelphia's Nicetown neighborhood. In addition to those headlines in the last week, I'll point to today's Philadelphia Inquirer, which says it perhaps better than anything else. So this is not normal. It is not okay. It is not acceptable. To those who question why the State House of Representatives is holding this hearing today, why the House is looking into the situation with crime in the city of Philadelphia, I say, in light of what is happening, it would be dereliction of duty if we did not take action. Listen to these headlines. We must act. There is no greater work, no greater issue facing the Commonwealth than addressing this situation. And it would be reckless for the General Assembly of this Commonwealth to ignore all of this and pretend that everything is just fine. Lawlessness, rising crime rates, and disregard of law and order should not, cannot, and will not be tolerated. It is a paramount duty of government to protect its citizens. As you will hear this morning, we have failed. No one can reasonably dispute that change must occur. As chairman of this committee, I take seriously the responsibilities outlined in House Resolution 216. Philadelphia has a rich history. The cradle of liberty, a city of immigrants, religious tolerance, and an unmistakable virtue. A city where a farm girl from New Jersey and a young man from Eddystone can meet each other at a concert, fall in love, get married, rent a house in Germantown, graduate from Temple University, work at Girard College, and eventually start a family and have a son who was elected to the State House of Representatives. That's my family's story. I wouldn't be here without the city of Philadelphia. And that story of opportunity should be available to every resident of this city and of this Commonwealth. I believe Philadelphia's best days are ahead, but it is unarguable that the city cannot move forward to the bright future its residents richly deserve when they don't feel safe riding SEPTA, going to the grocery store, walking to school, sitting on their front steps, or attending a high school football game. That introduction brings us to today. I'll be candid. There are loud voices who, in their effort to maintain a failing status quo, suspect that this committee's hearings today and tomorrow are meant simply to cast slanderous mud against the District Attorney of Philadelphia. If you are here today expecting, hoping, or fearing simple-minded mudslinging, you will be disappointed. As chairman, this committee will continue to take a serious, measured approach to fulfill the mission a bipartisan majority of the House authorized. This is no game. The committee welcomes all those who will join us to cooperate and participate in our mission with open eyes and open minds. But this committee will not slouch to unevidenced mob-pleasing accusations. And at the fore, we will not forget the lives lost and forever changed by violence in this city. Victims of crime are far too often left in the shadows without a voice. This committee is here to listen and to act. This committee will not hesitate to hold any individual accountable using the tools afforded to both this committee and the General Assembly by state law, case law, the rules of the House, and the Pennsylvania Constitution. The committee will act thoughtfully, with diligence, discretion, and fidelity. We will not be baited into the ditch of pure political circus. Others may choose that tactic. We will not. With that, I'm going to turn to Representative Brown for his opening statement. Representative Brown, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman, and good morning, everyone. So I want to take this opportunity to set the record straight and let the public know why I am here on this committee. And it's simple. I'm here to represent the victims of violent crime and my neighbors and my family and friends in the city of Philadelphia. And it is well beyond time that we start to actually solve this crisis that we're in. A little over 20 years ago, on a corner of 56 and Market, I was shot in the back at the age of 14 by a repeat violent offender. The memory of my blood on the pavement, the ride in the ambulance, and my mother screaming at the hospital, "Please save my baby." So when it comes to gun violence in our city, I take no back seat to no one trying to control my narrative. Having has spent several months in a county jail, witnessing the horrible conditions and the horrible treatment that inmates face every single day, I take no back seat to anyone when it comes to criminal justice reform. I am living proof of what second chances look like. Having had grown up in a home with 6 siblings and a single mother addicted to drugs, a father in prison with the front door barely locked, no heat in the winters, utilities cut off by the landlord when my mother didn't pay the rent due to her drug addiction. Being a self-made businessman and entrepreneur, which I learned from my community. And I must admit, I have failed several times, but I didn't give up, and I was able to get it right, and I'm here today. These are real life experiences that everyday Philadelphians face. And I am living proof that that young man or woman from my community can break barriers. So when it comes to our current crisis in Philadelphia, I think I know a little bit about the situation at hand. I take this job very seriously, and I will always choose to make the best decision for these children and innocent women being shot, for that formerly incarcerated person, for that family raised by a single mother on drugs, doing the best she can, and whatever it took to make sure her children ate that night. This is a very tough business to be in, and it takes courage and the willingness to do some unpopular things to bring forth some real change. A few weeks ago, I got a phone call from a constituent for me to come see his mother. She was 100 years old. And I get to the residence. She was happy to see me. And the son says, "I have one ask before my mother passed away," which she could have died any day. He asked to clean up the block and remove some of the criminals on the block so she can sit on the porch one last time before she passed away. She didn't sit on the porch in over 2 years because of the violent crime. She is why I'm here, sitting here today, to get to the bottom of these problems that we face. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Brown. I'll turn now to Representative Ecker for opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the committee for being here. I think today's hearing, as you will soon learn, is a very serious matter. I want to thank Representative Brown and Representative Lawrence for their comments, which really outline what today is going to be about. This is serious. We're talking about victims, we're talking about families, and we've taken this very serious. So I ask everyone to listen to the testimony today. You're going to hear from experts. You're going to hear from victims of crime. You're going to hear from folks that have lived this and understand this. And that's the work of our committee, is to find solutions to get to the bottom of what's happening in this great city, because it is the economic powerhouse of our state, and we need to care as a state. So no matter if I'm from Adams County or Bucks County or the city of Philadelphia, we all have a vested interest in making sure our city here in Philadelphia is a great place to live, that people want to raise a family, and continue it to be the economic driver that it is. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to the Chairman Lawrence, and I just want to thank, again, the work that the committee's done so far, and I look forward to the next 2 days of hearings.
Thank you, Representative Ecker. Representative Thomas for opening statement.
Good morning. I'm Wendy Thomas. I'm from Bucks County. I grew up in Montgomery County outside Philadelphia. And I'd like to reinforce all of the opening statements that we've heard. Representative Lawrence, Representative Brown, Representative Ward. We're here to try to figure out what we can do to help. And I just want to take a moment to thank all of you. So I assume that all of you are here to hear and contribute on how we can help solve what is an obvious problem in the city. So thank you for being here. I look forward to the testimony today.
Thank you, Representative Thomas. Today we're going to hear from some of those who have suffered firsthand as a result of the current state of affairs in Philadelphia. All of these individuals have felt the pain of unnecessary loss. And as chairman, I thought it was critical that the first thing we talk about in a public hearing of this committee is the real human impact of spiraling crime in the city. The numbers I recited earlier, the numbers about escalating crime, personal injury, economic damage, civic harm, those numbers can too easily become abstracted. Statistics dehumanize the impact that these kind of actions have on real people. Each number represents a person, a human being, a family, a spouse, a child, a friend. The first focus of this committee's public hearings will be to highlight personal, intimate loss that happens far too often in this city. I'd like to stress this. None of the individuals testifying want to be here today. Indeed, most will appear by recorded statement. All of them simply wish they had their loved ones back. All of them are regular, everyday people whose lives have been upended by violent crime in a city that is unfortunately becoming numb to it. Their stories are important, and this committee will do its very best to listen to them, to hear them, and to fight for them for a better Philadelphia. Later today and tomorrow, the committee will hear expert testimony describing state grand jury processes and an analysis of arrest, prosecution, and sentencing trends in Philadelphia relating to violence committed with firearms, and the training of assistant district attorneys in the city and statewide. This information will be an important component of the committee's deliberations. I'd like to note that to date, much of the committee's work has not been publicly facing. And when these hearings conclude tomorrow, the committee's work will continue, much of it confidentially. Like any large investigation, interviews have occurred in a private setting. Reams of documents relating to the committee's duties have been collected and are being reviewed. We continue to develop and evaluate information coming to the committee's attention, including new information that has come to the committee's attention as recently as this week. But first, we begin by looking at the visceral consequences of lawlessness in Philadelphia. We begin with stories of those whose lives have been irreversibly changed by crime. I will mention that the testimony you're going to hear today will not be easy to listen to. First, I call up written testimony from a resident of South Philadelphia. For her protection, we will refer to her at today's hearing as Ms. A. She is unable to attend today's hearing in person. As you will hear, a formerly enthusiastic resident now fears this city and the harms its current lawlessness have wrought upon her. I'm going to recognize Representative Wendy Thomas to read her testimony into the record. Representative Thomas, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The following is written testimony provided to the committee by a resident of South Philadelphia, whom I will refer to as Miss A in an effort to protect her identity. And I'm quoting the testimony. I was born and raised in a suburb outside Philadelphia and was excited to purchase my first home in South Philadelphia in December 2018. After the first 2 weeks of the pandemic, I started working out with two neighbors outside to stay active during quarantine. On March 31st, 2020, at around 4:30 in the afternoon, we started our workout by running up and down the block and then doing exercises on the sidewalk. Within the first 15 minutes of our workout, a gang-related shooting started between two groups of people. While we were totally unrelated to the gang activity and minding our own business with a workout, we were caught in the crossfire. It was terrifying to go from enjoying a spring afternoon outdoors to running to take cover behind a car. I was hit with one of the bullets and shot in my chest. I sustained injuries to multiple ribs and my left lung. I'm very fortunate to have been picked up by a police officer and rushed to a local trauma center so I could receive life-saving care that I needed. After a week of hospitalization, I came back home to my home in South Philly in an attempt to return to normalcy. The entire shooting, which occurred in broad daylight, was caught on camera. Unfortunately, no arrests were made, and I was never contacted by the District Attorney's Office. Prior to and following this incident, my car has been broken into multiple times. I never reported it to local police because I knew the city wouldn't do anything. My insurance and registration card have been stolen in addition to valuable items taken from my trunk. When my car was broken into in September of 2019, the intruder smoked multiple cigarettes using my cup holder as an ashtray. I am currently abroad for a work trip and have looked forward to getting away from Philly for a few weeks, only to be contacted by a neighbor who informed me that my car was broken into. After the 2020 incident, I turned on Citizens Alerts, an app that informs you of local crime, so I could be aware of what's going on in different areas of Philadelphia. I had to turn the notifications off after a week because it was constant. Notifications of shootings, carjackings, and assaults, which I found triggering. A day does not go by where there isn't violent crime activity in Philadelphia. I intend on leaving Philadelphia as I no longer feel safe here and will urge anyone I love to do the same. End of quote. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Thomas. We will now go to video testimony. First, we will hear from Karen McConnell. Ms. McConnell's 21-year-old granddaughter, Jaylene Holton, was senselessly murdered this past June while out with friends at a bar. Jaylene was an innocent bystander caught in the crossfire. We'll now review the video.
On June 28, 2022, Anthony Nelson came to the bar at Philly Bar and Restaurant at Welsh and the Boulevard to play pool. But since there was a pool tournament going on, there was no pool tables available, and he wanted to play pool. and he started a ruckus inside the bar, and after a while they threw him out. He stayed outside for almost an hour, ranting and raving, and my granddaughter showed up. It was a little after 11, after they played at Top Golf. They were at Top Golf, and within that 15-minute frame she was there, he opened fire. He went to his truck and retrieved the gun and fired 15 shots into the bar, one striking my granddaughter in the head, which was probably, they said, around the third shot. She was in the back of the bar, and it struck her in the head. They did an investigation with the witnesses and everything, from videos and everything, and they were really up on it, and they went out to his neighborhood. They found out where he lived, and then finally they got some information, and then I heard apparently they got his girlfriend, and I heard she gave up everything where he was. He was down at the Wildwood July 4th weekend, and from there he went to Atlantic City, and that's where they captured him at, playing cards at Atlantic City. And when they arrested him, he was laughing. 2 years prior, I believe he was accused of raping his girlfriend's 15-year-old daughter, which there was a lot of evidence that pointed to that was going on. And he spent time in jail, and when the court case came up, somehow he won the case, even though it was a slam dunk case. But apparently these new assistant ADAs in this administration are not doing their job because they're lost. They're just being handed cases, and they're just lost. If he was convicted of the rape charge, which he should have been, my granddaughter would be alive today. He wouldn't have been out on the streets. The Krasner's office has failed us because they're not doing their jobs. They're letting these criminals out. They're using white gloves to pacify them because it's not fair and all that. But the innocent people are the ones that are paying the price. That should be here today, and they're not, because they're letting them off easy, dropping charges that they should be in jail. And it's not that a one-time thing, it's they got records as long as you're armed, but they're pacifying these criminals. My granddaughter, Jaylene Holton, she was a stay-at-home girl. She wasn't your normal 21-year-old. Went out once in a blue moon. Most of the time she went to her boyfriend's house a couple blocks away. They watched TV. Or she was home with us playing with my great-granddaughter, like Roblox, and she loved the Xbox and all that. And she just recently purchased a car. So it was like her pride and joy, and it was color red, which was her favorite color. And it sat more than she drove. But, she worked at Target, and came home. She wasn't one of these wild girls going out and partying all the time. She'd go out once in a blue moon, but otherwise she was home. And some people might say, well, boy, for 21, that was her. She liked to read, just sit around and talk. She had a kind of a rough life. Her mother passed away when she was 2. Her future, she was just looking into going back to school, trying to make something different of herself, and going for it. And, maybe getting married, having kids, leaving grandmom's nest. But she was a sweet girl. She was sweet. You couldn't answer, she had her little quirks that drove me nuts, but, other than that, I couldn't, couldn't. Someone said, how long is she going to live with you? I said, probably till she's 80. She just didn't, have that confidence, and she was just now coming out with that. She was just finally realizing that she was pretty, that she, and building her confidence up, and that's what really hurts now, is that she was finally coming out of that shell, and now we'll never know what she could have been, as far as in the future, because I always try to give her confidence, go for the gold, honey, just go for the gold. It's you, nobody else. You think about yourself. Anger, you're playing with people's lives, and then you're in like a cloud. Like you're like, well, if he would have did this, with this, my baby would be here, or my and it's horrible. Like me and my son was just talking about last night. We don't even remember what went on in July. Like we were just talking about it because that whole month is like a blank. Like because we had so much to do, and the funeral and everything else, and it was just like, where did July go? Because we don't remember. It's just that, and you're dealing with that anger, and I said, it's not right that you gotta, you're not supposed to. I just retired 2 weeks prior. And it was like a happy, I'm retired, yeah. And then 2 weeks later, I'm in disbelief. My granddaughter's killed. That's something that could have been prevented if they would have did their job and spoke,
Next, we will hear from Malika Womack and her father, Robert, whose daughter and granddaughter died from multiple stab wounds. Oh, excuse me, that will be next. But next, we will hear from Tiffany Flynn. Tiffany Flynn, whose 19-year-old daughter was murdered August 16th, 2021, in broad daylight in a grocery store parking lot in Olney.
On August 16th, 2021, today makes 1 year exactly, my daughter was approaching ShopRite, which is located in the Alani Plaza Center, to enter that supermarket, had intentions to go in there buy a pack of meat, when she was alongside her young man she was dating at this time. She was the passenger in the vehicle, and 3 young men approached my daughter. It was approximately, I would say, 7 o'clock in the evening when the situation occurred. Many people, of course, out in the shopping center, doctor's offices. The situation was recorded. It went viral on social media, where they asked for videos and things of that nature. My daughter was shot 3 times, one time being in the head. So they recorded her like that and shared it. So along not getting any answers or justice for my daughter, even speaking on her being less than 50 feet away from a camera on the ShopRite Center, they have no video surveillance or answers to say what happened to my daughter on August 16th, 2021, while the shopping center was filled with people shopping and attending mail posters offices and doctor's offices and all kinds of things of that nature located inside this plaza center where this situation occurred. I was told it was 3 men came out of a vehicle, an all-white vehicle with black tinted windows and black rims. These 3 young men were told to have masks on, did the shooting that they did and got back into this vehicle and exited the plaza. However, again, there was no surveillance on this. One of the theories I was given was told to me it was one certain young man who I did my little bit of own research on and seen a description of this same exact vehicle, who bring me to strongly believe that that was the individual responsible for my daughter's situation. I bring that information to the detectives who are in charge of my daughter's case, and I was given nothing in return. No information, given nothing, if it was helpful or not. Every time I contact them, I'm told they got no new updates, they're still working on her case. Today makes 1 year that my daughter hasn't been here. I mean, it's going on and on, since the time my daughter's been murdered. The rating of the women's killings has went even higher. It's just insane, and it's just like, what are you gonna do? What can you do? And just seeing, I live less than 5 blocks away from where my daughter was murdered. So I look at, is it something you're doing to prevent another young woman from being in the same situation? And I don't see that. I don't see any kind of patrol vehicles sitting out there, or anything being put up, an awareness of these 2 young people were murdered in this plaza. We need answers. They have billboards that have been there and been neglected for years. This situation will be 1 year now that has taken place, and nothing's been done about it. There's no kind of awareness being brought to that plaza of we're trying to gain answers, and I just feel like it's much more. There's so much funding out here that, being paid out in taxpayers and everything else, that it can be applied to whatever needs to be applied for to put in place to prevent these things from happening. To, you know, at least make these killers not feel as confident as they feel right now to do these things. You know, I feel like they feel right now they can get away with it so often. It's becoming more of, it's getting bigger and bigger of a problem, you know, and now it's our children. I mean, it's our women, you know. It used to be the fathers, it used to be our sons. Now it's becoming our moms, our grandmothers, our, you know, and it's, when will it stop, you know? And this is who we look to. We look to the DA to help us, you know, and it's like, we don't have the answers of what you need to do, but we want you to do something. At least show us you're starting somewhere. My thing is nothing violent. It's a very peaceful rally. It's about letting the community know and letting them know who my daughter was, to let them know Ajane was not a street person or an individual that's involved in anything that she shouldn't have been involved in. She was a 17-year-old child working as a manager. So until she was 19, that when my daughter lost her life, she lost her life as a manager and a healthcare worker, as well as going to school to become a nurse. So she was a very educated, motivated young lady that does not deserve this to happen to her, especially being as though she was going into a shopping center where we all shop every day. And to see that is nothing being done about it. I see young children riding their bikes through there all the time, and my first thought is anything could happen to them. You know, their parents are thinking they're okay, they're right here in the community, they're just riding around, and unfortunately the same place that you live in, you're not safe in. And it's sad, but it's true. I moved there back in 2006, and at that time, Albany wasn't the best of the best, but the rating of the killings was absolutely nowhere near what it is now. And it's scary to say, just about less than a month ago, my daughter was out in my front, just right in my front, at the front of my house in the pool. And about 3 o'clock p.m., they were shooting. A young man at the corner got shot in the foot, you know, and it was just insane to see that this could take place so often, you know, and it's becoming so deadly. Even in front of your own home, you're not safe, you know. You used to be able to sit out and look at the birds, you know, or just enjoy the cars riding past, and you can't anymore, you know, just broad daylight. These kids are shooting out, you know. The kids, one day were getting out of school, and right there, you know, by the Ritas, right across the street from my house, they started shooting. And it's literally children walking home from school, and they're running and ducking down, and it was a shame to see, you know, but this is the reality of what we're witnessing today.
Now we will hear from Malika Womack and her father, Robert, whose daughter and granddaughter died from multiple stab wounds.
On July 26th, my life was changed. I get a knock at the door telling me to get to the hospital. Jada been stabbed. So I'm instantly like, what? I'm like, well, where's the other people? Oh, they're there too. So her dad come out, and he's like, what's going on? And the young lady tells him what happened. So it was like, I wasn't here. It was just like, I just threw on something. And we get in a car, me, her dad, and my oldest son. And I just felt something wasn't right, and I'm calling her phone, and she's not answering. And I'm like, God, please just let everything be okay. And it felt like it took us like an hour just to get to Einstein. And we was like trying to find an emergency room. I knew where it was at, but it was like we couldn't get there fast enough. We finally get there. The young lady who knocked on the door was already there with the other young ladies that was their parents. And so Jada dad parked the car. I'm sorry.
Would you like tissue?
And
Okay, I'm sorry.
I'm calling people. I called my dad. I said, Daddy, Jada been stabbed. He like, what? Calm down. He couldn't hear me. And I was like, get to the hospital. Jada been stabbed. So he like, all right, I'm on my way. Jada dad get out the car because I was going to go into the emergency room. And he said, no, you stay here. Let me go. So he go in, and I'm on the phone. My oldest son in the back seat, he's just like calm as ever. And he go in through the security and everything. And I'm just on the phone calling people, y'all got to get here. Jada been stabbed. We didn't know what was going on. When Jada dad came back out, he fell to the floor. He started banging on the emergency window, and I just knew. I was like, "Oh God!" I knew it was bad. So I finally was able to go in the back, and it was the two young ladies there. The one young lady who fight initially was there, and she had my daughter blood all over her arms, and all the cops was in there, and the OR doctor was like, he said her heart stopped for 12 minutes, but we brought her back. And it was like, we're working on her, and just wait. And they was like, would you like to speak to the chaplain? When he said that, I automatically knew. I automatically knew just from my spirit telling me this, because when her heart stopped, there was no oxygen to her brain. So she was gone. She was gone. Finally, we get in the room. I'm preparing myself. We get there. She just had all these tubes. The machine was keeping her alive because her heart didn't stop. They brought her back, but she suffered 2 strokes. She stabbed her in the neck. She stabbed her in the kidney. She stabbed her in the back. I see where the stitches. Her mouth was swollen. Her feet was swollen. I took her feet and I put them back under the cover. And her head was like swelling up like a pumpkin. And I remember this one nurse, she was like, I'm going to stay in here with her. And she was like, I tried to wake her up and she wouldn't wake up. And it was like, when she said that, I knew. So I just was like, Jada, mommy love you, mommy love you. And I just kissed her. So by this time, we in the hospital, all the family members, grandparents, cousins, aunts, uncles, we all at the hospital. So the next day, more family came. The doctors went and did brain surgery on my daughter. They was giving us hope like they was going to save her. So, the state that me and her dad was in, we signed the papers and it was like, okay. I said, I'll do anything to have my daughter here. I was like, I will take care of her. I would be her nurse, anything, because she wasn't going to be the same. She already suffered 2 strokes. And they said, okay, Miss Womack, Mr. Hellums, that's her dad. They gave us a card. So when it was time for her to go to surgery, we was able to see it on a flat screen TV that when like them prepping and they actually doing the surgery. So we probably working on an hour of sleep. So we in the room waiting for the surgery to get done. And then we woke up, the two doctors came in. And he was like, we sorry, it wasn't nothing we could do. We never seen nothing like it. When they did the brain surgery, he said the blood vessels in her veins was like popping out. It wasn't nothing they can do. So we just already knew to prepare for the worst. So after that, we go downstairs to the waiting room because we had to wait for the phone call to say she was deceased. So we down, I'm talking to people. I'm not really here on earth. My body was here, but me mentally, I wasn't here, So we sitting down, longest days of my life, longest days. Finally, we in the waiting room. I'll never forget, I was sitting in the chair, I had my phone. And I get the phone call, and he was like, it happened about 7:56 p.m. And it was like, Miss Womack, Jada gone. And I just dropped to the floor, and it was like, I do remember people picking me up, but I was just like, I was stiff. I was like dead weight. And everybody was like, get her phone, everybody crying. And then once I came through, I remember sitting in the hall. I was like, well, can I see her? And we had to wait until the medical examiner came. Once the medical examiner came, We went home, and that was just like the worst time of my life. I've really missed my daughter, I feel like. And that's the other thing. The detective that was on the case never reached out to me. Every time I would call her, she was off or she's not in. Her supervisor, they're not there. The first time I seen this detective, she had a nerve to show up to the pretrial. I said, "Who are you?" She wanted to explain to me what was going on, but the whole time, no one did not comfort me and my family in our time. And to this day, I still don't know what led up to my daughter's death. I probably won't find that out until we actually go through the trial. How bad is that I don't know what happened to my child, because there's so many mixed stories. When Jada died on the 27th, they immediately did the arrest warrant and she was arrested. I did a interview with Channel 6 News, and I didn't even know she was arrested until we seen the story on the news, and a young lady mugshot was up there. So she was arrested. When my daughter passed, they automatically arrested her. She was in jail. She was in jail for a year. We go to court May 24th, and the judge, the ADA that's on the case was there, giving out the evidence. One of the witnesses was there. The other witnesses was not there. Only one was there. So the defense is saying, "Oh, these young ladies, they was playing on my client phone, and they blocked my client car in. They threatened my client child." And clearly the witness that was there was like, none of that happened. But the judge or no one wanted to understand that. So the defense attorney said that she needs to be home to take care of her newborn baby and her other child. They had no remorse for my side of the family. Nothing. None of my daughter credentials mattered, nothing. It was all about the defense. The judge asking this young lady, "What school you graduated from?" What that has to do with a murder case? Why are you asking her what school? What do that have to do with anything? She is a murderer. There's no getting around that. You took a life, and you did 2 attempted murders. And not only that, she had already an open gun case. So she already a menace to society. Then you take a life, you make bail on the we went to court the 24th. She made bail the 27th. No one from the district attorney office, even the ADA, did not even tell me. I called her on the phone. She said, "Oh, I didn't know." I said, "How you didn't know? You're working on a case." It doesn't make sense to me. So I goes and I do my own homework. I look up the judge. The suspect that killed my daughter was arrested again July 19th of this year for assaulting another person. And she turned around and made bail again. So I called the lawyer, the ADA, and I let her know what was going on. "Oh, I see that. Now I'm going to proceed to file a motion with the court." How is this possible? This suspect made bail twice. You out on a murder charge. Murder and 2 attempts. First, it was first-degree murder. Then they made her do a plea, so it drops down to third-degree murder. You know what the ADA told me? "Oh, Philadelphia doesn't do first-degree murder." Since when? I never heard of that. So she made a plea. My thing is, first of all, how did she make bail the first time, and then you come out and you assault somebody else, and you're home again? Where's the justice in that? I can't see my daughter again. I gotta live with this every single day. It hurts. It's a struggle to get out of bed to start your day without my daughter on my mind 24/7, 7 days since she passed away. It is hard. You have to go to a grave site, knowing your child buried in all that dirt, just to see your child. I feel like before, you know, I do remember Lynn Abraham and when I was younger, and I used to be like, oh, I don't like her. She throw people in jail. But I was young and I didn't understand. But now that I understand, she was keeping criminals off the street. And I feel like the Krasner, I feel like he's being lenient. Why is nobody in the city of Philadelphia reaching out to us mothers? Why, even Outlaw, Kenny, why aren't y'all reaching out to the victims to get our sides of the story, to understand where we're coming from? It's not fair. No one wants to lose a child. I never thought in a million years that I would lose my child. That's a hard shoe to fill. You think any of these politicians or Krasner, do you think you will be able to walk in a mother's shoes who lost a child and have to bury them? No, not at all. This is an everlasting pain. It never goes away. I don't understand why aren't they trying to help us and be on our side. Y'all more so for the criminals, but y'all not with the victims and the co-victims. Why is that? That's what I want to know. Why? How can a murderer be out on the street? How? And y'all worry about other stuff. You talk about this, you talk about that, but I don't never hear them talking about the victims. Why nobody's here for us? Why nobody wants to meet with us? Why? Why is that? What's going on?
Next, we'll hear from Jennifer Mileski and Dean Maud, whose son and stepson, Chucky, was murdered while asleep in his own car.
On March 12th, Chucky dropped his daughter Isabella off to my house. He left, he went down to 3238 Emerald Street, was out there for a couple hours. There was multiple people in the corner. Eventually everybody left. Then he was sitting in his car. He started to he fell asleep. Two unidentified men drove down Madison Street, parked on the next block, got out, walked up the block, turned on Madison Street, walked past Chucky's car. The next block would be Willard. They stopped on Willard for about
5 minutes, not even.
Maybe not even 5 minutes, about a minute. Walked back to Chucky's car, stopped in front of his car. One was like in front of him, one was in behind him. He was in the car, sleeping, actually. And the one that was in front pulled his gun first, attempting to shoot, but the gun wouldn't go off. The one who was behind him fired one shot, walked away. The other one tried to shoot more. His gun didn't go off. Then eventually the neighbors, probably like 15, 20 seconds later, the neighbors started coming to the windows, the doors, so they ran. They ran down Madison Street back to the car, and then that's it. Still no arrests.
No persons of interest?
No, nothing.
Chucky wasn't considered a homicide until 2 days later because he was on life support for 2 days. So homicide didn't pick up the case until 2 days later. We talked to several people and they said that they weren't questioned. We just find it weird, like why wasn't anybody questioned? Like we would go and question people. We would go knocking on all the doors in the neighborhood asking them to see their cameras because there's cameras everywhere.
The camera footage that he does have, he got because of me. I went knocking on doors. I went to the businesses. A lot of people were willing to give me, like I got some of the footage and forwarded to him, but some people, like the stores, were like, you have to have the police come. And then I would go back to them like a day or two later, police still never came. So then I had to like keep calling the detective, like, what are you doing? Some of these videos will start to record over, like they loop. So then he was like, all right, I'm gonna send somebody out. So most of the footage he already had came from places that I went, or there's another store that's right there at Madison and Kensington. It's a tattoo shop. Cameras face every way. Probably if they would have went there and asked for the footage, we would have had a definite on the license plate. They never even went. The detectives never, there's a witness. There's a kid that lived across the street. He saw the whole thing. He was pulling up. That's how I knew Chucky was sleeping, because he looked in the car and he was like, oh, Chuck fell asleep again. He was never questioned by homicide detectives. Never. The people in the corner store was never questioned until we did that email where we were all together, so he couldn't lie, like, okay, I did it, then he'll tell her, no, I'm going to do it tomorrow. That's when he did go over to the corner store and ask questions, and he left his business card with a couple people that were standing on the corner, but he didn't question anybody, which I find odd. He never talked to me, he never came to me. He was supposed to do a formal, like questioning, because my house was the last place Chucky was. Never came. Never talked to his siblings. Like, I thought that was just common. Like, did you know if your brother had any enemies? Nothing. The people he was on the corner with right before it, never. He never pulled nobody in for questioning until we wouldn't let up. There's no repercussions. You have younger kids now shooting people, committing crimes that, like, we never would have when we were younger. But that's because little kids always looked up to the older kids. So they're seeing the older kids walking around with guns. You have no police checking them. You visibly can see the gun. I mean, I lived in that neighborhood. I'm down there all the time still. You see these kids, you can see the gun. I know if a police officer is riding by, if I can see it, I know the police officer can see it.
But they can't stop them.
But they can't stop them. So I understand the police officers, like, their hands are tied. Another thing is, like, especially in Kensington, you have 1 million addicts that are just allowed to sit and openly get high. Well, if people are allowed to get high and nobody's allowed to touch them, the police or nothing, we're making safe places for them. We feed them, we clothe them. Well, of course it's going to draw drug dealers. And you're getting drug dealers from all over. We have people in Kensington that aren't even from Pennsylvania. They come down here to sell drugs because they can. Mm-hmm. So if you have people from all over and this isn't their neighborhood, they don't care because it's not their neighborhood. And then you have younger kids who are seeing the older kids. They shot somebody, but they got arrested. But they're out. They're out within a couple days or a couple weeks. So what is that saying to the younger kids? I lost everything. I don't even. My family's not the same. I'm not the same. His daughters, his nieces, his nephews, his brothers and sisters, like, nothing is the same. When he died, I died. I know that. I try every day for my grandkids and my other kids, but, oh, you have no idea what it's like to not care at all, but to care so much at the same time that you don't know what to do, so you just completely shut down. And then it hurts because I'm like, Chucky was such a good person and he helped everybody. Why is nobody not saying nothing? Somebody has to know exactly what happened. And it would just, that would be it. Nobody says nothing. And I feel bad for him. Because I feel hurt. Like, I feel like nobody really cared about him. And he cared about everybody. He didn't like guns. He did not play with guns. He did not carry guns. He had a very old soul. His ways about everything was like very old school. So I miss him. You know, you never realize how much you really need a person or what they are to you or what they do for you until you don't have them no more.
Committee now turns to in-person testimony. Committee will be briefly at ease while we bring in our testifier. The committee will come to order. The committee will turn to Nikisha Billa. Ms. Billa, would you please stand and raise your right hand to be sworn in? Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give is true to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief? If so, please indicate by saying, I do. You may be seated. Nikisha, the committee appreciates your presence here today. I want to personally thank you for your courage and your willingness to talk about something that's difficult and personal. Could you please introduce yourself to the committee? You're recognized.
My name is Nikisha Billa. I am the mother of Dominic Billa.
Could you tell us a little about your son growing up?
I usually speak when I talk about Dom and our story. I usually speak from the heart. I have never prepared anything because something like this is hard to prepare for. But today, I have taken the time to write everything out. So please bear with me as I read from my papers. On March 29th, 2021, my life was forever changed, unjustly by the hands of someone else. My family survived the COVID pandemic, but were not able to escape the gun violence epidemic that is plaguing the city of Philadelphia. Prior to that dreadful day, I would often listen to news reportings of the many lives that were stolen through gun violence. A whisper of a prayer for the latest victim, I internally would pray, thinking to myself, this is so unimaginable. The very thing I could not imagine, the very thing that was happening to countless others across the city, a mother's worst nightmare, it happened to me. My son, Dominic Billa, was senselessly murdered at the Philadelphia Mills Mall. He went there in pursuit of work pants, Dickies apparel. Dominic set out to prepare himself to apply for an apprenticeship at the local 420 Steamers Union. He previously worked at Jefferson Hospital, and once he would be accepted for the job, he would need different work attire. Dominic was so excited, he expressed things were going to go in his favor because his birthday was also 420. And to him, that was a good sign to come. Dominic left home to never return. A day that was supposed to be full of hope and new beginnings was stolen in a blink of an eye. I often tried to replay our last moments together that afternoon before I had set out for work myself. Did I kiss him? Did I hug him? that I tell him that I love him. And gratefully, I sit here before you and can say that I did all of that. Yes, I hugged Dominic. I told him how proud I was of him. This was customary between him and I. Dominic was very affectionate. Dominic was openly affectionate even with his family and friends. Of course, Dominic had clothes that he could have worn to apply for the apprenticeship, but he took so much pride in seeking what he wanted. His parents had to be perfect. He was striving to look the part for the part that he desperately wanted, but he would never make it. Shattered and broken, I sit here before you. The grief, the trauma is unbearable. Stricken with grief from the time I rise in the morning to the moment I lie down at night to rest, but only my soul can't find any. The pain that has penetrated deep down within my solar plexus, that it literally takes the air from my lungs, where I feel I cannot breathe. Grasping for air, pain that blurs my vision without warning at times. The effects cognitively, where the brain just doesn't process things as quickly as it did before. The forgetfulness that I also experience from the grief. And the slowness in my physical movements and my quest to keep pressing forward in search of justice that can never wrong this right. Each day, a new report comes across the television screen or on the feeds from the social media platforms. A homicide has occurred at this location, on this date, and at this time, but no arrest has been made. I'm baffled with so many questions as to how and why no arrest. With so many cameras around, everyone is recording. When I hear about gun violence prevention initiatives that are led from the DA's office and the talks of a budget, how much is that really allocated to solidifying the technology that this city needs to aid in solving these murders and preventions? I heard it mentioned that we simply do not have the technology to identify the people committing these acts of crimes that are unfolding right before our very eyes. May I suggest that we lobby for funding to get investigative technology that the city so desperately needs to get criminals and illegal firearms off the streets. Increase funding for witness protection so that people won't have to make the decision not to come forward with information because they are scared. People don't testify because they fear retaliation. But make no mistake, they want these criminals off the street too. There have been more murders than there are days in a year. 561 murders in 2021, the year Dominic was murdered. When District Attorney Larry Krasner tenure began, I was hopeful for the Black and brown community to have a district attorney in office that has a civil rights background. For a very long time, our community has seen many loved ones unjustly prosecuted, adding to the breakdown of the family unit. My family was not exempt. Mr. Krasner was supposed to have been the relief of unfair practices that our community endured for years. So I thought. It has either been extreme jail time sentences for low-level offenses, or like now, where slaps on the wrists are given for violent crimes, and the wrongfully accused pleading their innocence, where more than often fell on deaf ears. So of course, Mr. Krasner would find favor with the community in getting the majority of the support, because many believe that he would have upheld the civil rights, hear out our plights of the innocent, and protect the Philadelphians by convicting those who continuously violate and cause destruction in the city. It is apparent that convictions are not taking place, by the continuous daily data released of shootings and homicides. It's to the point that these numbers are being released as common as a scoreboard in a basketball game. This is not a game. I'm tired of losses every day. There is a large percentage of youth between the ages of 14 and 26 years old that are in possession of illegal firearms, committing murders, robberies, and carjackings on the streets of Philadelphia. Many of these offenders have prior criminal records, just as the person who murdered my son. If he was convicted on previous charges, Dominic would be here today. I am here because of the lawlessness that continues to plague the city. This is not a political stance. This is a stance from a mother whose whole world has been turned upside down since the death of my son. There are repeat offenders not being held accountable at the start of a criminal profile early on, taking no real sense of responsibility and lessons learned that will either save their life later from making bad choices or save the next victim's life by their own hands, because no accountability was required of them early on. Repeated low-level offenses turn into high-level crimes you see displayed out in the community, causing a great deal of pain and destruction when there is no accountability. I do not sit here before you as a Democratic or as a Republican-affiliated party. I sit here before you as a mother caught up in the system that has failed my family, failed Dominic on so many levels, and Mr. Krasner knows this personally. This is not an attack or a witch hunt, as I've heard Mr. Krasner reference to. This is about taking steps to restore law and order. This is about preventing other mothers and families from being destroyed by policies that further contribute to the demise and destruction of wholesome families. Dominic was 21 years old at the time of his death, a high school graduate, certified in carpentry by trade. He attended community college briefly and always planned to return someday. Dominic began working at the age of 14, like many youths, through the Philadelphia Youth Network. At 16, he had a driver's license, the first out of many of his friends. He was an excellent athlete. He played football, basketball, baseball, swim meets, and track. He ran in the Broad Street Run with the group Philly Run Style and came in first place out of all the participants from his school. Dominic even tried his hand in theater one year. He auditioned in the Lion King production and landed the leading role as Simba. That's when we discovered that he could sing and that he could go further than just being in the shower singing. Dominic was generous. He was a giver. Even at a tender age, he noticed a friend with holes in his shoes while they were playing a video game in his room one day. Dominic gave him a brand new pair of Jordans that was purchased for him in the start of a new basketball season. As his friend was leaving, I noticed him wearing the sneakers I had just bought Dominic the day before. After his friend left the house, before I could even ask Dom, he said, "I already know, Mom. I already know what you're going to say. But, Mom, he needed them more than me. He had plastic grocery bags stuffed inside the sneakers so that his feet wouldn't get wet if it rained." So then I asked, "Well, couldn't you just give him an older pair, gently used?" Dom said, "No, Mom. Nobody wants hand-me-downs. He doesn't have parents. He's in placement because his father was murdered and his mom was in prison. The compassion my son had and held for his peers were unmatched. Children fear of being gunned down in the streets coming from school. Rest in peace, Juan Carlos Robles Corona. Pastime at their neighborhood centers are now in jeopardy of being crime scenes at any given moment. Rest in peace, Miss Tiffany Fletcher. On a weekend home visit from college, struck by a stray bullet while driving down the street. Rest in peace, Jasmine Lewis. Unloading the family car carrying a case of water into the house. Rest in peace, Sean Toomey. A trip to the mall for a pair of pants. Rest in peace, Dominic Billa. And just 3 days ago, 14-year-old Nicholas from Saul High School. Rest in peace. Sadly, I could go on with names when it should not be this way. I receive calls on a daily basis from families of victims. Ms. Billa, can you reach out to this mother? She just lost her child from gun violence, and we just don't know how to console her. And in my response, there is none. This is the sort of loss that there isn't anything that anyone can say or do to ease the devastating blow. But yes, I say sure, give me her name and number. And in my head, I'm thinking to myself, how can I help her when there are days that I can't even find relief myself? I remember a mother by the name of Ramona. She reached out to me shortly after Dominic's life was taken. It was her text messages coasting me on what to expect, the array of emotions that I may experience from day to day, because she knew it all too well herself. Ramona is the reason why I accept the calls from others to reach out to other co-victims such as myself in the greatest time of their need. Ramona knew exactly how I would be feeling. Rest in peace, Demarius. How many mothers have been extended to be a part of the CARES program from the District Attorney's Office? There are just some things that only a mother that shares in the same pain would understand and can help other families through. The DA has contributed to the rise of gun violence over these few years consecutively because of his policies. And if things remain the same through 2026, it's irreparably damaging and should not be at the expense of human life.
Nikisha, thank you for your testimony. I again want to thank you for being here today, and I know it's not where you'd want to be. Could you tell the committee, Nikisha, maybe you could talk a little bit about what are your future plans? Do you plan to stay in the city, or what are you thinking about down the road?
I want out of the city of Philadelphia. This is the only place that I have ever lived, born and raised, where all of my extended family members are, but I want out. I want out. I don't feel safe. The trauma of losing Dom on a regular day. Shopping, something that we should all be able to do and not fear or not think that we would lose our life. I live in fear every day because I have other children that I worry about. And for me, thoughts of what will happen if he just goes just a few feet away from the house to a store. Or when he asks, Mom, can I go to the rec center to watch a football game? Or just play ball with his own friends. I have to talk myself down. The trauma. Because I can't hold him hostage. I can't keep him in a bubble. And I don't want to traumatize him any further by not allowing him to live out of my fears, out of my loss, out of my trauma, because I'm afraid to allow him to go out into the streets of Philadelphia. So I went out. But then I sit and I wonder, the Dom's remains are here. And there are some days that I need to go to where he is resting just to be by his body, to alleviate some of the pain that he's there, but not there. So I don't know how, when I make this transition to move, when I'm able to, how that looks for me. Because the reality is that Dom's body is still here in Philadelphia. But I went out. And I went out because I am afraid of the safety for my children and even for myself. I'm afraid when I get up in the morning to leave out to go to work in the morning that I have to look left and right to make sure that I don't see anyone sitting in a cut that might try to carjack me, because I'm leaving so early in the morning and it's dark. But then, does the darkness really matter? Because carjackings and shootings and crimes that are going on, they're going on in broad daylight. So that doesn't even matter if it's dark. I went out. But then there are times I sit and I hear people say, oh, Nikisha, you're so strong. You're the voice for other mothers. And this is not something that I want. This is not like a profession to look forward to be a voice for other mothers that are broken. But it brings me back to my relationship with my son Dominic and how I have always been his biggest fan and his advocate for everything and anything. And so my advocacy, the support that I give, I can't let that go either, because I do it all for him. It is his life and his legacy that gives me the strength and that gives me the pull and the power to want to help others. Do I have the answers? No, I don't. But I can be a support, and I can be the voice, and I can express this trauma that I live daily, that doesn't never ease.
If you had the opportunity to say something to elected officials in this city, in this state, about what needs to change, what should happen, what would you say?
I don't know if there is one answer. I believe that there is many answers. If I had that opportunity to address the elected officials, I would ask them to address all of the issues, not just one, not drop the ball in one area, not just push the blame on other departments and say, well, we can't do this because we don't have this, and this is the mayor's office responsibility, or this is the police department's responsibility, or this is your council person's place. I am tired of hearing the different pushbacks or transfer of responsibilities of each office. I would like to see that everyone comes together and we sit, just as we are here before this committee, and we sit at a round table and we work together and we bring in and we lobby for money for technology to solve these crimes, that we hold the criminals, especially the repeat criminals, accountable for their actions. I would ask that we also pay special attention to people that are unjustly accused and going down the path of getting caught up in the system. I would ask that we also have things set in place as far as social work to deal with the dysfunction that continues to evolve and perpetuate in our community, so that we can find a middle ground or stance to prevent the direction that we are going in. And so do I know what that looks like? No. But I believe that if we all come together on this common ground, then surely we can find ways to fix this.
Thank you. Do other members of the committee have a question? Representative Brown, you're recognized.
Yes. Thank you, Chairman. First and foremost, thank you for being here. It takes a lot of courage to come in front of this committee and all the news and the public. So I applaud you for that.
Thank
you. Judging by one of the statements you just made, it seems like you and I both believe that we can reform broken systems and hold people accountable at the same time. Would you agree with that?
Yes, definitely, I agree with that.
All right, thank you. Do you believe that is currently happening in the city of Philadelphia?
No.
Okay. And if I'm asking too many questions, please, you do not have to answer all of them, okay? Has any city or state agencies contacted you since your son's death?
No. I have been the one that have been reaching out to others. I had came across a vigil one day, and it was for the late Shorm Toomey rally for him for his death, and that was the day that I met Representative Martina White. I've gotten a lot of support from their office on allowing me to express how the effects of this trauma has had on my life. But no, I have not had anyone contact me. It was always me seeking out organizations for help. Like even in the beginning, in my state of blur, watching the news, I would hear of certain organizations. And sadly, no, none of them contacted me. I was the one that reached out to them.
And thank you. Have you ever received any victim services?
I have received the services, I think it is through the state, the Victims Compensation Service, I think VCAP.
Okay. That's through the state?
Yes.
No city victim services?
Not from them reaching out to me, but from me reaching out to them. Yes.
Okay.
And I did hear, after calling, I did get a return call from the CARES program.
Okay.
But I did not really find the information helpful or resourceful. And this is why when I mentioned in my testimony that the DA office would reach out to other mothers such as myself to serve on that committee or that panel or that sector of the CARES program, because we know what it feels like. And speaking with them at the, I think, 4 weeks that is allocated, I didn't really receive anything that was helpful.
All right, thank you. Do you feel as though we have in the city of Philadelphia, that we have a crisis of crime?
Yes.
Okay. Do you feel as though in the city of Philadelphia we have a crisis of lawlessness?
Yes.
Thank you. Have you ever been contacted by any staff or supporters of the District Attorney's office?
No.
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 Okay.
None other than when I reached out to ask for what services were available.
Have you ever been reached out to by any staff or supporters of the Attorney General's office?
No.
The police department?
No.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That concludes my questions. Thanks.
Thank you. Nikisha, is there anything else you'd like to add for the record?
No.
I again want to thank you for appearing before the committee today, and I commend you for your bravery and your advocacy. With that, the committee will break until 12:15, After the recess, the committee will take up an issue that's come to our attention as a result of a recent concurring opinion written by Pennsylvania Supreme Court Justice Kevin Doherty, who served both as an assistant district attorney in Philadelphia and a judge in the Philadelphia Court of Common Pleas prior to being elected to the highest court in Pennsylvania. The committee will take testimony regarding the use of the grand jury process in Pennsylvania. The committee stands in recess until 12:15. Meeting of the House Select Committee on Restoring Law and Order will come back to order. I'd like to recognize Mark Rush, who will introduce our next testifier.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen of the House Select Committee, I'd like to proffer to you and tender as a witness Professor Bruce Ankowiak, who's before the committee here today, to the end of establishing Professor Ankowiak's credentials for testifying before this committee. I will briefly summarize some of his educational history as well as his work experience, publications, and qualifications in both state and federal courts in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania as an expert witness. Professor Ankowiak graduated from Harvard Law School magna cum laude in 1977. From that time to the present, he's had a number of legal positions, both in the service of the public as well as private clients and individuals, and representing various universities, and has served roles as a professor of law as well as a professional of criminal procedure. He was a federal prosecutor, commonly referred to as an assistant United States attorney for 6 years at the start of his career. During that time period, he served in the role of chief of narcotics and organized crime. As a federal prosecutor, he routinely appeared before federal grand juries, both utilizing them as an investigative tool to further law enforcement's objectives, as well as seeking federal criminal indictments against those where he and federal law enforcement agencies had established probable cause for such charge. He's been the special counsel for the Judicial Conduct Board of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania from 1995 to 1996. He served as a role in Special Deputy Attorney General in the Attorney General's office. As I noted earlier, he was a professor of criminal law at Duquesne University from 1989 to 2002, and then again from 2008 to 2011. He currently serves as counsel to the Arch Abbey and College at St. Vincent College. He has numerous publications. He has over 10 law review articles published on the use, including one on the use of deadly force. He's the editor and author of 2 criminal law books, Criminal Procedure in Pennsylvania and Standard Jury Instructions in Pennsylvania. As I noted earlier, he's been qualified as an expert witness. At this point in time, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to proffer or tender to you Professor Ankowiak as a witness before this committee.
Thank you, Mr. Rush. Professor, would you please stand and raise your right hand to be sworn in? Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give is true to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief? If so, please indicate by saying, I do.
I do.
Thank you. You may be seated. Professor, you are recognized and may begin with your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I was asked by the committee to address 2 issues. First, the propriety of the use of the grand jury process by the District Attorney's Office concerning the prosecution of Ryan Pownall with reference to specifically a special concurrence opinion filed by Justice Kevin Doherty in the Pennsylvania Supreme Court decision in that matter. I was also asked generally to address the policies and practices of the District Attorney's Office in the context of the proper scope of prosecutorial discretion as the law of Pennsylvania understands that concept. With respect to the first issue, Justice Doherty's major concern was the indication that the investigating grand jury was never given an instruction on the law, most particularly with respect to the impact of Section 508 of the Crimes Code. That section specifically discusses the lawful parameters of the use of deadly force by a police officer in connection with the arrest of a suspect. In the special concurrence, Justice Dougherty indicates that it appears that no instruction was given to the grand jury on this point, and that little or no instructions were given regarding any of the degrees of homicide that could have possibly been charged in that case. My full report that I have submitted to the committee details the conclusion that it is both a legal and an ethical duty of a prosecutor who is assisting a grand jury to give the grand jurors an accurate and proper advice on the law they are to apply. A grand jury is an ex parte proceeding in which no judge or defense attorney is present to raise or contest issues that might otherwise need to be presented for the proper exercise of the grand jury's function. And even though an investigatory grand jury in Pennsylvania is not empowered to return an indictment, Pennsylvania law nonetheless requires it to make a specific recommendation that an individual has violated a criminal law of the Commonwealth. And given this, it is critical that a grand jury understand the meaning of those laws and how the facts that they are finding relate and apply to those standards. Moreover, the ethical standards that apply not just to prosecutors but to lawyers generally is to ensure that law that is applicable to the resolution of a matter, even if it is adverse to the party's position, is nonetheless brought forward to a tribunal that has to make a determination with respect to how that law is applied. To the extent that the grand jury was not advised of the impact of Section 508 or other aspects of the law that were pertinent, the recommendation made in the presentment could raise a potentially serious problem. That problem could only be resolved by a complete review of the entire grand jury transcript and record in the matter. It may well have been that at some point during the grand jury process, grand jurors asked questions about whether a police officer is guided by some set of rules or standards different than a normal individual in terms of the use of deadly force. If that question in some form was asked, its answer could provide important insight as to the grand jury deliberations. Overall, the standard for finding that actual abuse occurred in the grand jury requires a court not simply to find that a prosecutor made an error. In addition, the court has to find that the defendant suffered prejudice as a result. And prejudice in this context means that the legitimacy of the grand jury's finding would be called into serious question given the error that occurred. And again, that assessment can only be made based upon a full review of the entire grand jury process. Now, to be sure, a prosecutor's office may take a position that a statute passed by your legislature is unconstitutional, or that it is otherwise inapplicable in the facts of a case. Prosecutor is free to take that position if, as a result of their good faith analysis of an issue, they come to believe that a law of the Commonwealth cannot be applied in a particular case without violating a constitutional principle. But until either the legislature changes that law or a court of competent jurisdiction strikes it down, the law remains applicable, and it is relevant to a grand jury's inquiry, and the grand jury should be so advised of it. In the present case, the District Attorney's Office espoused the position that sections of Section 508 were unconstitutional under federal constitutional standards. And ultimately, 2 justices of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court agreed with the District Attorney's Office, not only that its pretrial appeal was properly before the court, but that, in fact, sections of 508 did not pass constitutional muster. The 4-member majority of the court did not support the view that the pretrial appeal was legitimately brought and dismissed that appeal. But the fact that 2 of those justices, 1/3 of the justices who heard the case in substance, agreed with the District Attorney's Office's position makes it impossible to call the prosecutor's efforts to effect a pretrial appeal and its substantial position on those matters as a frivolous or bad faith position to take. Now, with respect to the second major issue that I was asked to address, Pennsylvania gives a very broad discretionary power to a prosecutor in terms of the decision as to whether to file charges in a given case. It is a fundamental application of the separation of powers doctrine that prosecutors are given considerable leeway. Recent decisions of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court have reaffirmed the position that prosecutors' authority with respect to the filing of charges is extremely broad, and their discretion is largely, although not completely, unchecked. In certain other contexts, and particularly as a case proceeds through the system, that discretion is curtailed, since ultimately judges and juries are called upon to make decisions about the case. But in the initial decision as to whether to prosecute, Pennsylvania is one of a number of states that affords a great deference to the judgment of the local prosecutor. Other states try to curtail that by constitutional provisions or by trying to vest additional supervisory authority in a statewide officer like the Attorney General. While the Attorney General of Pennsylvania has some ability under the current law passed by your legislature to intervene in a given case, the day-to-day judgments about what is prosecuted and how it is to be prosecuted is a matter largely left in the discretion of the elected district attorney. In that context, it appears that Pennsylvania has put into the hands of the electorate the final word about whether the policies of a given district attorney are in accord with their liking and should continue for a further term of office.
Thank you, Professor. I appreciate your testimony. I appreciate your willingness to be here today before the committee. I'd like to recognize Mr. Rush for questions.
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Professor, I think I would like to drill down on three areas, if I might, reflecting on your testimony. The three areas that I'd like to get a little bit more granular on are grand juries and how they're utilized and who's there and who's not there, and in particular the role, very, if I may say, characterize it, weighty role of the prosecutor in using grand juries. So we'll address that first. Then I'd like to move into preliminary hearings. What are preliminary hearings in the state of Pennsylvania? Are they material? Are they such that a defendant is guaranteed due process rights under the Constitution of Pennsylvania, and how preliminary hearings are designed to protect those that are charged with offenses by the state? And then the third area, and the one in which you concluded, and that is the area of prosecutorial discretion. That is an area, of course, that's of great interest to this committee. It's been of great interest to the investigation to date as to how prosecutorial discretion is properly used, how it is improperly used, and if improperly used, what avenues of recourse might the state or others have other than impeachment or waiting for the voters to cast their votes. We heard some compelling testimony this morning from a mother whose son was a victim and her concerns in that area. So, we'll conclude with prosecutorial discretion. So let's go to where I began, and that is the area of grand juries. Can you describe to the committee what a state grand jury is in the Commonwealth?
Certainly. First of all, it's important to differentiate between a federal grand jury and a state grand jury. The federal grand juries are creatures of the U.S. Constitution. The Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution guarantees every individual who is subject of any sort of a serious federal charge the right to have that case go through a grand jury. The origin of that right goes back long before the Fifth Amendment was passed. It was a protection against politically motivated prosecutors who would just bring a charge against a political opponent and let them twist in the wind until a trial could possibly vindicate them. It was all meant as a protection of the individual. The United States Supreme Court, however, literally in the late 1800s, decided that that particular provision of the Fifth Amendment did not apply to the states. The states were free to use other means to achieve those same ends. So most states, like Pennsylvania, does not use a grand jury to indict people. The grand jury, except in a very limited circumstance I can discuss later, the grand juries in Pennsylvania are investigating grand juries. They are constituted in either a multi-county jurisdiction or in an individual county. Their purpose is to conduct an investigation of potential criminal activity in that county. And their purpose is to consider whether a presentment should be given. A presentment, unlike an indictment, is not the charge itself. A presentment is a formal recommendation by this body, this grand jury, to the prosecutor to prosecute someone for a particular crime. The prosecutor remains free not to follow that recommendation if they don't wish to. Most prosecutors, however, will follow that recommendation as it comes from an independent body, a grand jury, that is making that formal recommendation to them. So there are other grand juries in Pennsylvania that simply publish reports about issues of interest, but the principal use of the grand jury in Pennsylvania is as an investigatory tool, with the end point being, if they believe that a person has committed a crime, they file a presentment against them.
So let's talk a little bit about the grand jurors, and their mission or their role. Who is on a grand jury? It's the citizens of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. How is a grand jury constituted, if you will?
They're drawn from the same pool of jurors that you draw a trial jury from.
Any special training required?
None.
Any legal training required?
Absolutely not. They are supposed to be a committee of the people.
So they are our peers, our neighbors, our sons, our daughters?
Absolutely, across the board.
I understand. Now, during this important work of the grand jury, I understand that they receive testimony and other evidence. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that testimony is basically proffered by a prosecutor under oath, and they hear witness testimony. Is that correct?
They will hear live testimony. The witness will come in before them, be sworn. This is all done, of course, in secret. Secrecy is a major feature of the grand jury process.
And why is secrecy so critical to the grand jury process?
It really affects three different goals. First of all, if the grand jury is investigating a very serious criminal activity, and many times you don't want the individual who is conducting that criminal activity to know they're under investigation, lest they either leave the jurisdiction, intimidate witnesses, or do something else that will frustrate the purposes of the grand jury. The second reason for secrecy is the witnesses themselves. You don't want people to be essentially hung out to dry as someone who has come in and testified. But the other purpose is to protect those individuals who are the subjects of the investigation. If it became public that an individual was the subject of a grand jury investigation and no charges were ever filed, their reputation would still be irreparably sullied. So secrecy serves all of those goals, and it is a cardinal rule of grand juries that those proceedings must be kept secret. And a supervising judge has a very interesting and limited authority if there has been a leak to even appoint a special prosecutor for the purpose of trying to find out how that leak occurred.
So you've mentioned a supervising judge of the grand jury, and I think that's important, and think it's important for the panel to understand what you've, in essence, described as almost hearings that more commonly would be done in front of a judge. Are these grand jury proceedings conducted in front of a judge? Is there judicial oversight at the time that the prosecutor is receiving evidence, testimony, and even providing legal instruction to the grand jurors?
The judge is not present in a normal grand jury session.
So it's incumbent upon whom then to make sure that the law that's being considered by the grand jury in their investigation is properly described to the body of the grand jury so they can reach conclusions as to whether to return a presentment or not?
The prosecutor is the public official in the room. Other than the prosecutor and the grand jurors, the court reporter, and the witness. Now, in Pennsylvania, we allow an attorney for the witness to be in the room, but that person is not permitted to participate, is not permitted to make objections, is not permitted to make statements during the grand jury, but they are there to advise the witness. But the judge is not present. The judge can only find out about what is going on in the grand jury if some impropriety is reported to that supervising judge. Otherwise, they do not have a direct supervisory role. I think the interesting part about why that is, the U.S. Supreme Court decided a case a number of years ago called Williams versus the United States, in which they made the observation that the grand jury is really not part of the judicial branch, it's not part of the legislative branch, and it's not part of the executive branch. It is an independent body meant to conduct investigations, and that it has that integrity about it. And for that reason, judges do not sit there to give oversight to grand jury proceedings.
So to that end, are there statutes, regulations, perhaps codes of conduct or ethics that impose a duty upon a prosecutor to fully and completely advise the grand jury as to what laws are at issue? And if there is, can you explain that briefly to us?
Yes. If you consider the laws that your legislature has passed that set up the grand juries in Pennsylvania are creatures of the legislature. They do not have a constitutional origin. They were created by the legislature in roughly 1980, if I recall, and those statutes direct the grand jury to consider violations of the criminal laws of the Commonwealth. It is not just for the purpose of finding facts. Yes, it is for the purpose of finding facts, but the presentment is supposed to be a presentment recommending that this violation of the criminal law occur. That by itself tells you that the grand jurors in voting on that presentment have to have a basic understanding of what the law requires. No, you don't expect grand jurors to have a mini law school course about these things. But they have to have some basic working understanding of what the law is that they are to apply. Otherwise, it's very difficult for those grand jurors to fulfill the function that the legislature has given them. And so it is necessary for that to happen. And as I say, a lawyer, any lawyer, in an ex parte proceeding, which certainly a grand jury is, a lawyer has an obligation to let the tribunal know about adverse law or adverse facts. That doesn't mean the lawyer has to say that I completely agree with this adverse law. The lawyer can take a position, but the tribunal has to be kept informed of this. And that is an obligation that runs across all attorneys. We cannot go into any ex parte proceeding and hide from that tribunal some adverse law that we know to exist. We can argue that that law is inapplicable here for the following reasons. We can argue that it is in fact unconstitutional. We can make all sorts of positional statements, but it's necessary that that be brought out so that the tribunal has that in front of them before they make their final decision.
So would it be fair to say that that is a material responsibility of the assistant district attorney who's appearing before that grand jury and seeking a presentment?
I think it has to be considered a critical point. And for federal attorneys, the Department of Justice guidelines on this point is very clear, that you absolutely have that obligation to advise the grand jury of the law. Again, there have been federal court cases that have said you can fulfill that by reading the law to the grand jury. Just read it to them. You don't have to go into some law school or law review exegesis on the thing, but you need to be able to put that law before the grand jury for their purposes.
Now, in a situation where there is a law on the books in Pennsylvania, such as the Pownell case, where the assistant district attorney affirmatively chose not to advise the grand jury of that existing law, what remedies or what follows might address that failure on the part of the district attorney?
Well, I would say if in fact that was a failure, the Justice Dougherty's opinion refers to a limited disclosure that was made at the order of the trial court in that matter that did not reflect that a formal instruction on 508 was given, and the presentment itself makes no reference to 508 at all. Again, a trial judge having to dig into this issue should look at the entire transcript of the grand jury proceedings. I would have to believe that at some point, some members of the grand jury ask questions about this. Well, what is it? What parameters does a police officer have to follow in a case like this? And there may have been an answer in that context. If there was an answer in that context, it would satisfy probably the obligation. This is a case in which I think a further analysis of that would be necessary. But if it didn't happen, as I said, that does not automatically mean that the presentment should be stricken. A judge would have to assess the issue of prejudice, which is, assuming this issue occurred, does it call into substantial doubt the final recommendation of the grand jury to bring charges? And a judge could say, no, it would not. The evidence was overwhelming. It wouldn't have made any difference. That could be the decision, but that has to be looked at only in the broader context of the whole record.
So I think during your earlier testimony, you noted that in the state system, a presentment is not a criminal charge, that it is incumbent upon the prosecutor thereafter, after receiving the presentment, to decide what, if any, charges to file.
Correct.
Those charges are filed, and then the defendant is entitled to, by statute, a preliminary hearing. Is that correct?
That's correct. Title 42 of the code, Pennsylvania Code, Section 4551E, clearly says that after a presentment, a defendant shall be entitled to a preliminary hearing. The word "shall" has particular meaning for lawyers. That doesn't admit of discretionary judgments.
Was there a preliminary hearing held in the Pownell case?
Apparently there was not, and that creates a question for me, and it was one of the things that Justice Dougherty, in his special concurring opinion, noted as problematic. The defense cited 4551E apparently in opposing the idea that a preliminary hearing could be bypassed in this case. The judge who considered that issue, who was not apparently the trial judge, but a judge previously on the case, nonetheless ruled that the preliminary hearing could be bypassed. That's a decision that would have to be re-examined, because in an earlier case decided by the Supreme Court, the Bestwick case, was a case decided before the legislature amended the grand jury statute to put this "shall be entitled to" language in. And in that case, it was a presentment, and they said, well, yes, generally you can bypass it if the preliminary hearing would be too cumbersome, et cetera, et cetera. But there's a footnote in the Bestwick case that says, yes, but the legislature just passed an amended law, and certainly going forward, this settles the matter. And apparently, for some reason, it was not settled in that case. The district attorney's office is chided by Justice Dougherty for not bringing up Section 4551E. Ethically, if the other party brings up a adverse law and it is before the tribunal, you are technically excused from not having brought it up yourself. And that really is it's an interesting conundrum to me about this, because 4551E can only be the subject of an exception under a separate rule of procedure in which witnesses have been intimidated. A prosecutor in that case can go to a court and say, I have proof the witnesses have been intimidated. If they make that showing to a probable cause standard, the court can authorize an indicting grand jury to be impaneled. An indicting grand jury, unlike an investigatory grand jury, would be told, your decision brings the charge. You have to decide whether or not there is sufficient evidence here to constitute probable cause. And in that context, you can then bypass a preliminary hearing because it becomes the equivalent of what happens in the federal court system. But that did not occur in this case.
If we can now turn to the issue of prosecutorial discretion, which is obviously of great interest to this committee. I know that you were asked to undertake a review of Pennsylvania law and see, at least pursuant to Pennsylvania law, what, if any, rules, regulations, or controls are imposed upon prosecutors statewide in which it would limit the discretion not to pursue criminal charges in certain areas, be they acts of violence, be they control of narcotics, possession of narcotics, be they juvenile offenses, etc. If you can, I believe that you indicated that Pennsylvania law does not provide. It gives great deference to the district attorney and the voters that elect the district attorney as to what charges to pursue, if any.
That's absolutely true. And in fact, two recent decisions by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court reinforce that. The Cosby case, where ultimately the Supreme Court dismissed the prosecution based upon the promise made by the former district attorney not to prosecute, is a case that contains extensive language about the breadth of discretion given to a prosecutor to initiate charges. Commonwealth versus Brown is a case where the defendant had been convicted, was facing the death penalty, came back in on a post-conviction relief act case, and the district attorney of Philadelphia supported the entry of a judgment that would have stricken the death penalty in that case, and argued to the Supreme Court that they would have the discretion to simply say, no, we don't want the death penalty anymore. The Supreme Court said, and quoted, in fact, a brief filed by the Pennsylvania Attorney General that said, look, at the beginning of the case, it is your discretion to decide to prosecute it, and it is your discretion whether to seek the death penalty. But the case has been tried. A judge and a jury have considered this. They have imposed the death penalty. You're now on appeal. We will hear your argument. You can go ahead and be an advocate for this, but we do not believe you anymore have that discretion. And it was an interesting discussion about how discretion narrows as a case goes along. There are very few cases where there is any practical limit on discretion. Certainly, a prosecutor can never make a decision based upon any invidious criteria. He cannot make it on the basis of race or gender or ethnicity or religion or political views or anything of that nature, anything that would violate the Equal Protection Clause. Beyond that, a prosecutor, for example, in a death penalty case, decides to file aggravating circumstances. There is a very limited opportunity for a defendant pre-trial to challenge that and to say, wait, there's no evidence of this being an aggravating circumstance. The court has given a very narrow window for a defendant to make a substantial showing that there is no evidence to support that charge, in which case the court may then inquire. The district attorney has the authority to recommend someone for admission into the ARD program. The judge has the discretion to admit them or not, but the discretion to move their admission is solely with the district attorney.
Let me ask you this question. It goes back to what you just stated, that it would be an improper exercise of prosecutorial discretion if it was based on race, ethnicity, age, sex, you may have named others. And I understand what you're saying, but is that improper both to whether to charge or not to charge? In other words, I understand that you should not, like a prosecutor shouldn't say, I'm going to prosecute this case because it's a woman and I believe women are committing too many crimes. What about the scenario where I'm not going to prosecute this case because it's a juvenile and I don't believe young people should be prosecuted? Would that be an improper exercise of prosecutorial discretion?
That's a fascinating question.
And it's really the conundrum that we're faced here with this committee.
The criteria for a decision made that someone would say, wait a minute, you have now crossed the line, you cannot base it on this, would again be something that is a classification based upon a criteria that would otherwise violate the Equal Protection Clause. Age discrimination is not treated under the Constitution in the same way as discrimination is on the basis of gender or race or ethnicity. There would be more leeway to do this. U.S. Supreme Court cases have not held that there is a fundamental classification of age that would come into play. So I think that kind of an argument would be difficult to make because of the lack of clarity that there is a suspect class of people who are under a certain age. But where the suspect class is otherwise has been solidly identified in the law, no, you cannot judge it on that basis.
So my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that the law as it's currently constituted or recognized, that the voters are the ones that are in fact the check and the balance upon a district attorney as to whether he or she is overcharging in his community or undercharging. Is that fair?
That is largely the case. There is again a very narrow provision of the Commonwealth Attorneys Act that the legislature passed that would permit the Attorney General to intervene in a specific case upon a showing that the local district attorney has abused their discretion. But that's a case-by-case determination. That's not an across-the-board mandate. In the report, I cited you to a provision of the California Constitution that gives the Attorney General of California a broader discretion to enter in certain cases where they believe a local prosecutor has not been properly addressing certain areas. That sort of leeway for the Attorney General in Pennsylvania is not available by the current law.
I mean, this committee may consider something like that.
It is not currently available, no. The law of Pennsylvania gives very great discretion to the local prosecutor.
So I understand the gravity of the voting public and the power that we invest in the voting public. But how do we balance that with a duly elected legislature, elected by the voting public, who carefully considers, debates, enacts laws to be enforced in the Commonwealth because the voters put them into those legislative positions to consider laws to protect society? How do we balance those voter rights with the power that we're giving a local electorate to elect a district attorney who chooses not to enforce laws passed by the legislature?
That's a great question that I wish I had an easy answer for. I don't. For perhaps long periods of time, most district attorneys, all district attorneys throughout Pennsylvania had a fairly narrow range of exercise of discretion. There wasn't a major difference if you committed a crime in Philadelphia versus committing it in Latrobe, Pennsylvania. You were likely to be treated in largely the same way. But where district attorneys exercise the discretion they are given by the current law, you can create a checkerboard sort of situation where there are very great differences in county to county, depending upon how the district attorney approaches certain statutes. That is a consequence of giving that discretion to the district attorney. That may be something that people think is fine because it reflects the local will of the people involved. Then again, I think a thoughtful discussion has to be had as to whether or not that kind of a checkerboard situation is something that really serves the broader interests of everybody in Pennsylvania. But at the present time, the district attorneys have that discretion, and they can, in fact, make those sorts of decisions essentially unchecked by any supervisory authority that does not exist right now.
So to sum up, if you will, as the law in Pennsylvania is currently constituted, the only remedy that a legislature could currently consider is whether the failure to enforce laws in the county of Philadelphia and the city of Philadelphia rises to the level of misconduct and constitutes an impeachable offense.
To my knowledge, there's no other statutory provisions on the books, there's no other constitutional provisions on the books that address a limitation of the discretion given to a district attorney. They are public officials, answerable to the public, and they have been traditionally given this level of discretion. And how and whether or not people think that's an impeachable offense is not my area of expertise, but there aren't any other statutes. Now, I can just mention one thing that, for the benefit of the committee, a number of years ago, when an amendment to the wiretap statute was put on the books, there was an obscure provision of that statute that said that if a district attorney authorized a wiretap and that there was a problem with that this was improperly done, that the district attorney could be removed from office. This was actually in the statute. There was a case that happened in Westmoreland County where a wiretap statute was put on, and the individuals who were the subject of that brought an action against the district attorney of Westmoreland County. And at that time, I was actually hired by the district attorney to represent them on that case. And it went to the Commonwealth Court. And the Commonwealth Court rules, it's the Birdseye case that's cited in my report, they said you cannot remove a district attorney by mere statute like this. The Constitution has the means to do so. And unless you follow those means, you don't have a basis to remove a district attorney. So they struck down a legislative effort to provide a remedy that was clearly articulated in the statute. They said, no, you can't do that based on the Constitution.
So basically, this House Select Committee, who was duly constituted, it finds itself in a position also as elected officials, also who has a duty to, if you will, ensure the safety of the residents of Pennsylvania, wherever they may be or wherever they may travel to, and they are left to consider how to respond in proper form. I want to thank you for your testimony, and I'm going to tender you back to the chair.
Thank you, Mr. Rush. Professor, do you have any remaining comments you'd like to make before the committee?
I do not. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate you being here before the committee today. I appreciate your report, which I'm looking forward to digging into. With that, the committee will break until tomorrow at 10 a.m. in the morning. At the time, the committee will hear from Mark Bergstrom, the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Commission on Sentencing. This committee stands in recess until 10 a.m. September 30th, 2022.